Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss. And today we have as our guest Bob McAdams. McAdams. And our topic today is why be a volunteer? Why give up your time and energy and sometimes money to volunteer for service to other people? So Bob, would you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell them about yourself?
Well, Melvin, I've been volunteering for a long time. I really became active like 40 years ago or more. We were a young family. We had designed a home that was passive solar. We had it on the south slope of a hillside in York County, Pennsylvania. But we were within a 20-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. And when on March the 28th that went into a meltdown, we were within a radius that could possibly have been forced to evacuate our home. And I was standing in the hall of my house, looking down the hallway at suitcases that we had packed and ready at the door. And I looked up at an electric light bulb and said, this is wrong. Producing the power for this light bulb, if it's creating a threat that could force my family and I to leave our home and possibly not return, that's wrong. Well, after the accident resolved more or less, the meltdown was severe, but the danger to the public was contained within the structures at the nuclear power plant, 3 Mile Island. We organized in York County, Pennsylvania, a group called ANGRY, A-N-G-R-Y, the anti-nuclear group representing York. And we were angry. We learned as much as we could about nuclear power and began to figure out what was going on with this nuclear power plant and what threat did it really present and what could we do about minimizing that threat. Well, a year after that, living in North Cadorus Township of York County, Pennsylvania, we were hit by another threat. We learned from a township supervisor that there was drilling going on at a sanitary landfill that had been closed by the Department of Environmental Resources because they violated their permit. And the supervisor was trying to find out, well, why is there drilling going on here? And he learned that the state had issued a permit to have a hazardous waste landfill at the site of this closed sanitary landfill. Now, this is in an area in York County where everyone is dependent on groundwater. We all had wells. There was no public water. And we knew that if you put hazardous wastes in the ground at that site, you would contaminate the groundwater, contaminate the drinking water that everybody was drinking.
By the leaching out of.
Yes, it would percolate right into the groundwater, and that would spread throughout the water table, and we'd be drawing it up out of the water table with our wells. This was a threat to everyone, every farmer, every person. We organized again, and we had the Opposing Unnecessary Chemical Hazards group, OUCH. Our church was right on the border of that landfill, and we were all anxious. Every congregation, every citizen in that area mobilized. The pastors and rabbis and whoever else, priests, were all deeply concerned that someone acting on their own would commit a violent act against the landfill operators, whoever might be there. And they were thankful that as citizens we organized, raised money, hired a lawyer, worked with the township, and fought that landfill at the local, state, and federal level. Now, from all that, what I learned, was that as a person living in our society, you have to be vigilant. You have to be watchful. You have to think about what's going on around you. You can't just run your life as if you're on another planet or on some paradise island that you didn't have to worry about what others were doing. So we became very watchful. And over the years, that dedication to watchfulness has led me into many activities, but we also developed a feeling of we're all in this together. We work together, we live together, we have to help each other. So there's kind of two types of volunteerism that I've been involved in. One is the activist looking to redress a wrong, because people doing all kinds of things will see something that's wrong, and then they'll decide, I need to act against it. I have to act against this wrong. And it's happened all over our country at different times. It was the civil rights movement. It was the anti-war movement. It was the environmental movement, and now the climate crisis movement, all of those. But there's also the service aspect. I see my neighbor in need, and I need to reach out and help my neighbor in need. And that goes through congregations, but it also goes through all the different charitable organizations that are at work in our community here and around our country.
Okay. Well, let's tell us then, that was interesting how you got started. But how'd you get to Charlottesville?
Well, I was working in York County, Pennsylvania for a wholesale distributor of magazines, newspapers, and books. And back in 1976, late 76, we bought a computer system, put it in the offices there, and it was this Wang 2200T.
Well remembered.
You remember the Wang stuff. Anyhow, it had 64K random access memory, and we stored all of our information on single-sided, single-density 8-inch discs. Well, after working with that computer system at the wholesale distributor level for about 8 years, I decided to see if I could find employment with the provider of the software, which I thought would be more interesting than the daily routine of distributing magazines, newspapers, and books. So we moved to Charlottesville, and I started working for a small company, MJ Systems, that was founded by two professors at UVA. And we wound up staying here. That was in 1985 that we moved. We lived first in Fluvanna, and then I moved up to Albemarle County back in '91. And I've been here ever since.
Okay. And you've been involved in the service to mankind,
Well,
to your citizens, your neighbors, and things like that. What are some of the more interesting organizations that you work with? But you still haven't said to me why a person should get involved, become a volunteer.
I think that why a person becomes a volunteer is something that rises up from inside of their heart. Mm-hmm. They have a feeling either of anger against an injustice or compassion for someone who's suffering. And that feeling just fills you, and you have to act on it. And people find ways to do that. I mean, there are volunteers in this area. We've learned from the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, there are more than 700 nonprofits in our Central Virginia area.
Well, what qualities or abilities do a volunteer needs?
Sometimes just mean a willing heart and hand, being willing to prepare a meal for a homeless person through Pachum, which is one of the activities that my congregation, the church that I'm a member of, will do each year. We've been doing it recently. But it could also be working for social justice through Impact, which is another interfaith, multi-congregational action group that looks at issues that affect our people in this immediate area, Charlottesville and Albemarle, and then seeks to address that issue by urging change in our community. And I think that word change is the important one.
Well, most folks got a job. They don't have a job. They have kids, raising kids. And volunteering takes a lot of time. Volunteering sometimes takes money. So what is the commitment there in being a volunteer?
It is time and it is money, but we don't spend every moment of our day working. some people have to have 2 jobs because they're underpaid, but a lot of people have time that we spend, sometimes in leisure, that maybe those hours go by too quickly, and it takes just a little bit of dedication to take some of that time and participate in some of the activities.
Now, you did a lot of recruiting volunteers. What did you look for when you were recruiting volunteers?
I didn't have to do as much when we had something like 3 Mile Island or the opposing unnecessary chemical hazards. The people came from all over wanting to help. And we had, with Ouch, we had sub-sales, we had concerts, we had all kinds of fundraisers in order to pay for a hydrologist, a geologist, and a lawyer, and all the other things that we needed to do to pursue the legal cases at all levels. What has to happen is that there has to be a core group to organize the volunteers. And that core group is what makes it really function. That takes more time. And making subs at a firehouse in their rec hall is not going to take too much of your time, but organizing that effort, that takes a lot of time.
Okay. Well, what I'm trying to get at is you recruit volunteers for different activities or different organizations that you that you work with. What are you looking for when you go up to when a volunteer comes to you and say to you, I want to volunteer? Aren't there some things that you should look for? Look at their interests. What are your interests? How much time do you have?
Usually their interests bring them to us, whether it's the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice. If they're concerned about peace and justice issues, that's what brought them to us. And then getting them engaged in working with us, that's the next step. But often it's their interest in the subject. I mean, after Ferguson, Missouri, when you had the Hands Up, Don't Shoot, and Black Lives Matter grew up, people were passionate about that. And they went to those organizations to say, I want to be a part of this. This is a terrible thing that's happening all over. We want to do this. And it was up to people to organize that impulse and get those people moving in a direction where they could make an impact on our society, force laws to be changed, force administrations to be changed. So a lot of it comes from inside the people. It's not that you have to convince them to do it. It's they'd like to do it, but what they're doing is they're looking for a way. I'd like to help my neighbor, but how do I do that? Where do I get started? Who can I talk to find out what this is about and what I can do?
Okay. To our audience, welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss, and our guest today is Bob McAdams. And our topic today is why be a volunteer? And we have some interesting information coming from Bob.
Right now, I'm president of the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice. I told you about that one. And we're working on the climate crisis because that's an imminent danger. And I've been concerned about the climate since the 70s. I mean, the house that my wife and I designed was a passive solar house back in 1976. And right now, we're learning from scientists that there is an impending disaster coming. And we have to listen to the scientists, and we have to change the way we do things. So right now, the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice is working on a campaign to make people feel more urgency about the climate crisis and really think about how they can cut their use of fossil fuels and other products that generate greenhouse gas.
Okay, how do you use your volunteers in that organization?
Well, as president, I kind of lead it a bit, but it's a very collaborative effort. We meet monthly, we make our plans, we collaborate with others, we have our email list, we encourage people to participate in events, and then we have events that we do each year, and then we have special events that are coming up.
Okay.
So
there's anyone interested, they can get in touch with Bob McAdams.
Yeah, CharlottesvillePeace.org is a way they can get in touch with the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice.
Okay. You were talking about your church and some of the service-oriented things you're doing with homeless.
Yes, Peace Lutheran is one of the many congregations that participate in PACEM, P-A-C-E-M. That's People and Congregations Engaged in Ministry. It was started about 15 years ago, and it's a service to the community, which came about because pastors and rabbis were coming to their church or temple in the morning and finding homeless people sleeping on the steps and in bitter cold weather. And they felt something ought to be done. So they created this PACEM, which provides overnight sheltering for homeless people during the cold weather months. Now, some of the larger congregations with bigger facilities will house men, and I've heard from the PACEM staff that they've been getting 45 to 50 men each night bused to the congregation, or they walk to the congregation from the Haven, and there they sleep. Peace Lutheran is a smaller congregation, so we don't have facilities that large, but we do house the PACEM women who would be bused out to our church just on 29 North at North Hollymead Drive. Mm-hmm. And we'd provide them with a hot meal, provide them with a place to sleep. There are mats that are set out. Then we installed a shower so that the PACEM women can shower themselves and get cleaned up, and we provided a washer and a dryer so they can do some laundry. And during normal years, we'd have activities that people in the congregation would plan to help, and we'd also have people who would stay overnight in case something was wrong with the building or something like that. So this is the whole congregation, volunteers, reaching out to help others through an organization that makes it possible to take that impulse to help others and put it into real action.
Okay. So what happens, you said in the wintertime, what happens during the summer times and the fall? What kind of services do the homeless folks get?
The Haven provides services, but in terms of sleeping, they're at risk. They're sleeping, under overpasses. They're sleeping off to the side in streets and alleys. I mean, the number of homeless people in our area is depressing. Now, PACEM has worked with AIM, another group, they've put together what they called Secure Seniors, where they found that some of the homeless people were chronically homeless, and they were older in their age, and they've made efforts working with other agencies in the city and county to find permanent homes for them. And they've been able to do that in several cases. That's a really great program. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, the people are just out on the street.
What do you suggest that, is this come on the responsibility of the local government here, the city or the county, or what do you think we can do as citizens?
Well, our congregation at Peace Lutheran is also a member of Impact. Now, if I get this right, this is the interfaith movement promoting action by congregations together. And what Impact does is, instead of looking at a problem in terms of mercy and helping to relieve suffering, they look at the problem from the terms of justice. They look at it in terms of what is structurally wrong here and what can we do to fix it. So Impact has worked, I started with them and our congregation started with them back in 2005, 2006, but they've worked on affordable housing because they know that for many people in our area, the cost of housing is so high that either they have to find housing outside of the area, even though they might work in the Charlottesville and Albemarle, they have to go out to neighboring counties to find housing that's inexpensive enough, and some people can't afford it at all.
One thing is, what does success have been for Impact?
Impact was part of the pressure that was brought on the city to establish their affordable housing fund. They did that back in 2006, 2007, and part of that was used as the funds to build the crossings, 4th and Preston. And the crossings provides homes for people who are formerly homeless, and they're subsidized, and they also have people who have low income, but it only begins to approach the problem. So Impact has come back to that issue several times over the years, and is currently working with the county as well as the city to have regular affordable housing funds set up to assist people who are well below the median income in the area and are struggling to pay for housing. I mean, there are 6,600 families in the area where people are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. And that doesn't leave a whole lot left for food and utilities and transportation and all the other things.
Well, one thing it appears to me that a couple more havens, not havens, but crossings should be built also, and not just affordable housing. Affordable housing is you got to have an income to purchase or either pay the rent on those things. But it seems like as we're talking about the chronic homelessness, it needs a place to stay overnight in good weather and bad weather.
Well, homelessness there are like two different types of homelessness. You have the chronic homeless, where maybe it's someone with a mental illness or some sort of infirmity that prevents them from holding a job, and they're always homeless. But then you have the people who are in transition. Maybe they're going through a divorce, or maybe they've lost their job, and if they can get back on their feet, then they can get back into housing of their own if they can get enough money. So those two different types of homelessness require two different approaches. But the people are still out on the street or sleeping in their cars in order to...
So we're getting ready to wrap up now, and
Okay.
just like to ask you, what are some of the things that you would like to leave with our audience when they're thinking about volunteering, the reason why they should be volunteering, and the impact volunteering has on other people's lives?
Volunteering, for one of the reasons, and that is the activist volunteer, what you have to do is be vigilant. You have to be watchful to make sure that injustice is not being perpetuated, to make sure that structural changes that are needed in our society to address income inequality, to address violence in our streets, particularly gun violence, to address the climate, that you're vigilant and making sure that our governments and our public agencies are working to address those problems. On the other hand, you need to be compassionate, recognizing that we're all in this together, and that by coming together and helping each other, we can alleviate suffering. So those are both things. And that, what happens when you engage in that, it's a physiological thing. It goes back to our being social animals. When we watch someone completing a good act, there are flows of joy that rise up inside. And you can feel it if you watch someone. If you're watching on the television and you at an earthquake scene and someone is lifting a person who had been under the rubble but is still alive, lifting them out, you just get this surge, this feeling. And that's what's kept humankind on the good side for a long time. There are other feelings that people have that are not so good, but you'll get real rewards from that. Why
don't you give our audience your telephone number if you want, or your email address. So if they want to get in contact with you, they can, to talk further about volunteering in some of the organizations you participate in.
My personal email is R as in Robert, S as in Stewart, M as in McAdams, 1539 at earthlink.net.
You say that again?
RSM1539 at earthlink.net.
And the piece?
CharlottesvillePeace.org will get you to the website for the Charlottesville Peace Center, Peace and Justice Center, the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice, and that's an organization that's been in existence since 1983.
Okay, so the biggest thing you're saying that you don't have to have any certain skills, that basically you have to have an interest and a drive to help others and be of service to your community, to be a volunteer. And that anybody can be a volunteer if they just step up.
Sometimes the only skill you need is to be able to stand along a side of a street or in a march or a parade, hold up a sign, and when people say, this is what democracy looks like, say, this is what democracy looks like.
Okay. Well, Bob, thanks for being here with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Melvin.
I'm sure our audience enjoyed some of the things that you're doing, and you'll be getting in contact with you. And I want to tell our audience, just remember, this is the Neighborhood Law Center. We're on TV, Channel 13, Mondays at 10, Wednesdays at 9, and Fridays at 8 p.m. But also you can go to neighborhoodlawcenter.com and see us again. If you missed this program and want to see it again, go to neighborhoodlawcenter.com, or go to the YouTube and go to Neighborhood Law Center, and you'll see some of the programs that we have done before. Okay, so this is Melvin Burruss signing off, and Bob.
Thank you, Melvin.
Thanks for being here, and remember, service to your mankind is the greatest gift that you can leave as a legacy. So until next week, peace and God bless.